on forgiveness.
Okay, and I think this quote that I brought, it's by Brene Brown, actually dovetails really nicely with our last conversation, and you'll see in a moment. To forgive is not just to be altruistic. It is actually the best form of self-interest, which is sort of what we were alluding to before, and we'll get there. Mm-hmm. It is also a process that does not exclude hatred and anger. These emotions are all part of being human. You should never hate yourself for hating others who do terrible things. The depth of your love is shown by the extent of your anger. However, when I talk of forgiveness, I mean the belief that you could come out the other side a better person than the one being consumed by anger and hatred. Remaining in that state locks you in a state of victimhood, making you almost dependent on the perpetrator. If you could find it in yourself to forgive, then you are no longer chained to the perpetrator. You can move on, and you can even help the perpetrator to become a better person too. So the reason this quote really spoke to me, right, is that kind of in line with what we were talking about, but now getting towards forgiveness specifically, is that forgiveness is really about a release for you. It's not as much about the other person, right? And I think there's some quote about, how anger is almost like drinking a cup of poison and you expect the other person to blow up. We almost want to hurt someone with our anger. We get so angry and we hope it does something to the other person. And that's really not how anger works. How anger works psychologically, right, is that it consumes us. We're the ones that are hurt from the anger that we're harboring, right, and the hatred that we're harboring, and it doesn't necessarily affect the other person. So I think what she's saying here, right, is that when she's talking about forgiveness, she's saying that you're making yourself dependent on the perpetrator, right? The only and that forgiving is not just about the other person and forgiving the other person, but it's actually a form of self-interest. And I'm actually curious from your perspective, because I do like this quote, but I'm wondering what Judaism is saying about forgiveness, because her idea, it seems like, forgiveness being selfish, is that really okay in terms of Judaism? Like, are we allowed to forgive from a selfish perspective? Does our forgiveness still count? I wondered that as I read this quote, but I really think psychologically that is how forgiveness works. I just wonder how that sort of dovetails into, Jewish literature.
I'm inspired by what Brene Brown writes here. We previously mentioned Rabbi Saks, and he has a number of teachings about forgiveness very much along these lines. And yes, this idea of forgiveness being something which is good for you to do, no matter how good it is for the other person too. It's about taking that yoke from upon your own shoulders because you're carrying a certain sense of resentment. Because really our task is to be good people. When we resent other people and we are frustrated with other people, that anger and that agitation makes us less useful, less easygoing, less good of Dei Hashem. What I do know is, of all the different teachings that I've shared of Rabbi Saks, it's those of forgiveness, which are very much echoing these of Brene Brown, which spoke the most to my students, because forgiveness is often misunderstood. It's about somehow giving somebody else a pass. And if somebody's done something wrong to you, you say, why should I forgive them? That's not right. That's not just. That's not fair. What Brene Brown is saying is, it's not so much to do with the other person. It's about you. It's about you recognizing that forgiveness makes you a forgiver. It means you're somebody of grace. You're showing grace to other people. In so doing, you're showing grace to yourself. You're lightening your load, and you're able to move on in the future without being held back by the shackles of the past. And if you don't forgive, you're always looking back, thinking about that moment or that incident, and that frustrates you. You're living in the past, and that's not good. And the whole idea of the Yamim Noraim is about doing a cheshbon hanefesh about the past in order to move forward. And to free yourself to move forward, you have to, it's a bit like a train, and you have to separate the carriages of the past, which are holding you back, in order for you to move forward towards your revised destination. So I think it's beautiful, and I think it's crucially important. And forgiveness is so misunderstood because, as I say, we think we're doing somebody else a favor, and we say, why should I? We're doing ourselves the favor, and God is doing us the favor. And that's why forgiveness is ultimately, as the Ramchal explains in Mesilat Sharim, a chesed. It's grace. It comes from the grace of God, and it comes from the grace of us to others and to ourselves.
Wow. I never really heard this kind of opinion on forgiveness before. It's beautiful. And it really, again, I think like all these quotes and sort of were a springboard for ideas that really turn things on their head, like, a very different way of looking at what forgiveness is, that it's a chesed. Beautiful.
Tshuva is a chesed, slicha is a chesed, especially when it comes from God, but also when it comes to other people. But chesed isn't just something you give to others. It's a midah, right? If you're Baal or Baalat Chesed, it's somebody who's foregoing, who's mevater, who's somebody who's able to say, yes, this happened, but it doesn't need to define me, because when it does, you become a toxic person, and it's not good for you. You go to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and you say, forgive me, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, so you want me to let go of your past, and you're not letting go of that person's past? Give me a break. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we say in the Gemara, measures us the way we measure other people. So if we are unprepared to let go of other people's stuff, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, why should I do that to you? And so we need to learn how to forgive in order to be worthy of forgiveness.
Wow. I actually was like taking a sneak peek at the next quote that you're about to share, and I'm excited for you to share it, because it seems like it actually even gives more insight into this conversation.
Right. So Rav Shagar, in one of his wonderful essays discussing the theme of tshuva, says as follows: we're used to thinking that the major effort during these days of slichot, and by the way, Sfaradim already started slichot at the beginning of Elul, Ashkenazim are starting in the coming week. He says that we're used to thinking the major effort during these days of slichot is devoted to asking forgiveness from our Creator and from those against whom we have sinned. However, the words of our sages teach us the opposite. The fundamental question is not whether we'll be forgiven, but rather if we ourselves can forgive. That's the measure. We think that we are waiting for somebody to do something for us. And the Kodesh Baruch Hu says, no, it's the opposite way around. Are you prepared to take that first step? Are you prepared to call a friend that has wronged you and say, don't worry about it? Or are you prepared to basically erase from your memory bank that thing that happened that agitated you? And you say, maybe that person was having a bad day. I don't need to carry that with me for the new year. Because Baruch Hu is waiting to see whether we're doing that. And that itself is then mirrored in God's relationship with us.
Wow. I think it's interesting. He says the fundamental question is not whether we will be forgiven, but rather if we ourselves can forgive. Because I think so much of these days, right, is like sending out a message like, do you mochel me? Do you forgive me? And all this idea. And I'm not sure what, and I know there is, source to this idea of you ask forgiveness 3 times on 3 different occasions. And then if the person doesn't, forgive you, then okay, then it's not your problem anymore, fine, whatever. But I almost think like this is taking us away from that trite way of looking at forgiveness. That's not necessarily what it's about. And obviously, you want to work out things with people from the past, but this is really saying that's not necessarily what matters right here. The question isn't necessarily, is the person going to forgive us, but can we forgive? Can we let go? I think that's really beautiful. I wonder if you have any insight. What happens if you do try to, ask forgiveness and someone is just not budging? Like, is this, what do you do then?
Well, you've alluded to the Rambam, who speaks about how we're supposed to be mefayes, we're supposed to appease people, and if we're lucky, they respond affirmatively. If not. Actually, the Gemara tells us if it doesn't work through the first endeavor, then maybe try and use a different tack. And the rabbis say, although it's best to speak to somebody face to face, if you feel that that's not going to work, maybe write them a letter or nowadays a message. But certainly our task should be to try to make peace with people where there is an ill feeling or a certain sense of unease. But I'm interested too in this last line of Shagar. How do I demonstrate that I've forgiven somebody who hasn't approached me to ask forgiveness. Imagine somebody's wronged me and they haven't come up to me, but I've decided, I don't want to bring this into the new year. I want to forgive them, whether or not they come knocking at my door, whether or not they send me a message. And so if you'd write kind of a creepy message saying, that thing you did which really annoyed me, I've forgiven you. That may work for some people. Other people, that may well be like, pouring oil on a fire. They'd say, what? I should be annoyed with you.
Right.
But I'd say perhaps the best way to demonstrate the fact that we've forgiven is to do a positive gesture. Actually, not to mention the thing, but actually to reach out with something altogether different. So imagine you've had an argument with somebody and you've decided that you want to forgive them, even though you perhaps think that they should have approached you, but they haven't. How do you illustrate that? How do you demonstrate that? If you're having a gathering at your house, invite them if previously you wouldn't. Send them a gift. Show that you're thinking of them and that you're cool. I mean, it sounds like a naff way to describe it, but to show that you're on a different level rather than it being the uneasy dynamic that previously existed at some point in the year, that you wish to build bridges. Now, that person may not necessarily want to move forward, but reaching out with an olive branch by doing something constructive. The whole point is, rather than badgering somebody saying, "Do you meichel me?" your job is to say, not only I meichel you, I want you to be in my life. I want you to come to my house. I want you to know that I care about you. I want you to know that you're important to me. That's what we need to be doing, because that affirms a relationship. That tells me that I care about that person and that the minor incident that agitated me, whenever it was, is less important than the relationship we have between each other.
It's almost like when we're talking about guilt from and guilt toward, it's almost like forgiveness from, and now it's forgiveness toward. It's not just about the past, but now let's move it into the future. I think that seems to be the theme here, whether it's guilt or forgiveness or, all of these themes that come up during these high holidays. It's about, how can this help us? How can we be better in the future and not only harbor feelings of the past, and be stuck?
That's such a beautiful idea. And it reminds me of one of the most touching moments of one of the most touching books. You may well be familiar with Tuesdays with Maury, Maury Schwartz. Yes. And there's a very, very tender moment there where Maury's talking about forgiveness. And he describes a friend who was absent when Maury and his wife were going through difficulties. His wife was going through cancer treatment, and he really resented his friend. He was angry with his friend, and he didn't talk to his friend. And then his friend died. And Maury told Mitch Albom how important it is to forgive. And I love that distinction of forgiveness from and forgiveness towards. You want to hold a grudge for what a person didn't do in the past. Okay. But will there be a future of your relationship? You know what the future will bring? If you really want to be future oriented, let go of the past so that if you do see that person again, it can be better. And if you don't see that person again, if God forbid something terrible were to happen, in this case, his friend passed away, you'll not be perpetually frustrated by how you didn't let go of that moment, how you were so-called principled. But as a result of that, the friend died not knowing quite how he was with his old mate Maury. So forgiveness towards is a lovely idea. It's about looking towards the future and asking, God, forgive me for the coming year, and you should forgive others for how things may well be in the future.
Beautiful. Wow. This was a very, very enlightening conversation about forgiveness that I don't think I've ever had before. Thank you.
So we've covered 4 quotes. Rabbi Reuven Bulka, your wonderful grandfather. We looked at a quote from Rabbi Saks. We looked at a teaching from Brene Brown and one from Rav Shagar. And I've really enjoyed this conversation. Unscripted conversation. We didn't plan exactly what we're going to say, but we said, let's do this. And I'm really grateful. And it just goes to show how we can learn from each other if you just take a few moments, and how we can share ideas with each other and enrich each other's lives. So thank you, Rikki.
And thank you, Rabbi Johnny. Thank you. This was really, really, really productive conversation, and it really got me into the mode of the Yamim Noraim. And I hope for anyone listening, it gets you into that mode as well, and gets you thinking about these themes of guilt, of forgiveness, and gives you a more positive way of viewing them.
Beautiful. Take care. Have a great day.